the director for the Bromeliad Society International. Jay said in the newsletter that he is the affiliated show chair. We don't necessarily do shows here at our club, but if we do, and when we do, we'd have to go through Mr. Birdsong there to get our awards and set up our show and make sure it's all on the uppity-up. He travels the world judging shows. He's a master judge for the Bromeliad Society International and a founding member of the Baton Rouge, Louisiana Society. Did I say it right?
That's absolutely true.
No, but did I say it right?
Yes, it's the Bromeliad Society of Baton Rouge.
Well, the Baton Rouge part was what I was concerned
You got
about.
it. That's just north of New Orleans.
New Orleans. New Orleans.
Well, I could say New Orleans, but
Richard Nick's company.
that's right. There may be some Yankees here that wouldn't understand it.
But in any case, a true Southern gentleman, Mr. Charlie Birdsong.
You mentioned Cajuns, and I could say that, you know, it's great for y'all to see me here and be my friend today. But I've been growing neoregilias for many, many years. I still have my original from the 1960s, Neo Spectabilis and Neo Marmorata, both of those plants that I started with. And way back last century, when I was doing that, my first bromeliads, Carolina tricolor was the only variegated neoregilia there was. And boy, it was something special. But that was so long ago, and now we're very fortunate. Not only do we have 120 different species of neos, we've got 5,461 registered cultivars and at least that many more hybrids known just by their hybrid names, and they haven't been registered yet. And I believe there's even 164 bigenerics with neoregilias. So the neoregilias have come a long way in the years, and I want to show you if this works for me. One of my favorite neos, this is Neo Painted Delight. And back in the early 80s, I was at a world conference in California at one of those fancy hotels, and I can't remember if it was LA, San Francisco, or San Diego, one of them. Probably San Francisco, because it was a pretty uppity place. And a little Hawaiian named Bob Okazaki, who's passed away now, he came walking into the auction room, and he had a box, and in that box he had Painted Delight, Manoa Beauty, and Kahala Dawn. And those were three Hawaiian hybrids that we had never seen before. And in his other hand, he had a can of beer. Nobody knows where Bob found a can of beer in a fancy San Francisco hotel, but Bob was that way. Several years later, I was able to visit him at his place in Hawaii, and I did happen to notice that there were at least as many beer cans as pots on his benches. So I figured, you know, Bob wasn't got too far from it. But that's a story, the rest of the story for another day. What I decided was I had to see how much money was in my checking account, what I thought my credit cards would handle, and hope that nobody else at the auction saw these three plants. So I got everything ready. The next night when the auction came up, lo and behold, to my chagrin, the starting price was higher than I could afford. So it was another 10 years before I was able to get and grow those three plants. But that's one of my favorites. I can't make it look quite like that because I don't have Hawaii in Baton Rouge. But it's a beautiful plant and a beautiful neo. When we think about the neos, their first description of the neos was as a Tillandsia back in 1825. Later it was moved to a Bilbergia. Then it was called, some of them were called Nigellarians. Then came Paratus and Agelia. And then Lindman in 1890 named them Regelia. And he named them after a German botanist who was the curator or director of the St. Petersburg Russian Botanical Garden at the time. And that's where their name came from. But things didn't settle down there because somebody noticed that there were some members of the myrtle family that were already named Regelia. So Lyman Smith in 1934 changed the name to Neo-Regelia. So Edward Auguste von Regel is still in Regelia, and now we have Neo-Regelias, which as far as our area and my area in Louisiana and Texas and the whole Gulf South, we can grow Neos. They grow well for us, almost no matter what we try to do to them. And so it's a favorite plant to grow, and an awful lot of people do grow them. Now, what's the description of the Neos? The plants are epiphytic. The foliage is abundant. It's rosculate, and that means a rosette, round shape, if you speak botany. The form is dense, groups united by stolons. The leaves always have spines on the margins. Now, you may know 2 hybrids that have come out that don't have spines, but that doesn't count. The peduncle, which is the stem of the bloom, the whole bloom inflorescence, is below, in the cup, below water level, if you put water in the center of the plant. The inflorescence is dense, simple, or branched, and coryambiform. And that's a one word that tells you it's flat-topped, elongated, or round, and again, very low in the cup of the plant. And the flowers pedicellate. That means each one has its own little stem holding it. The petal blades are extended to form a star when they open up. And the sepals, which are the parts of the plant that cover up the flowers before they open, are asymmetric. They can be different lengths, different sizes. So that's our botany for today. How do you tell them apart from some of the other nidular blooming genera? Well, that means nest-shaped, so it's a nest-shaped bloom. You've got that in Canistrum, Nidularium, and Wittrockia. But those 3, the botanists look at real close and they say, well, they're non-asymmetric sepals and they don't have petal appendages, so you have to get up close and personal if you're going to key them out botanically, but they look different for the most part from the others. What we do as botanists in general, and I'm not a botanist, I'm a fishery scientist who worked for Sears. So there weren't a lot of us, and I didn't do fishery work. Did appliance. Well, I had service technicians who went out and did appliance, and I listened to all the customer complaints. That was my job for 32 years. But we take the plants and we separate them into families, and then we separate the ones that are closer together into subfamilies. And then we separate those within that have similar characteristics into a genera. And then the ones with the similar characteristics, we would split out again into subgenera. And as we get more specialized, then we would have species, and we could even have subspecies. But it's a matter of categorizing plants, so you look at them and says, well, this looks like that. So those 2 may be close. We used to do that by looking at them, but now we do it by DNA testing and everything. So if you have a lot of money, you can get the DNA of all your plants checked. I'm not sure what you know once you do that. But the Neo-Regelia have really been split into 4 subgenera. Proto-Regelia, Longipetalopsis, Neo-Regelia, and Heliacum. Okay, the first subgenus of the Neo-Regelias is Proto-Regelia. The Proterogelia is really, there's only a single species. It's endemic to Brazil, grows in swampy areas at sea level, on the ground, or as an epiphyte. Either one. They have large white to purple blooms with some dense woolly stuff around the flowers as they get larger. It's a huge grower, but one thing that sets it apart is that the pollen is grooved or channeled. And that's one of the aspects of the more ancient of the plants that have the grooved pollen. So it's close to Withrockias and Igmias. It has the most ancient as far as the pollen type, and it shows some features that the other three subgenera have also. So it's sort of the prototype or the oldest. And I doubt if any of you grow it. 6 to 9 foot across, down in the swamps, coming out, and it's not a beautiful thing in my eyes. And I certainly don't have the greenhouse space to give to it. Maybe if I lived in Costa Rica or Brazil, I would, but I don't. So that takes care of the first subgenus, which you probably will never have to worry about again. The next one is Longipetalopsis. Now, Longipetalopsis is a little bit different. It has the most endemics, and we know that that's the most plants that are only found in one spot or one region. They're not found widely. They found them once, and that's basically it. They're restricted to areas over 800 meters in altitude. And that sometimes becomes limiting factors for us as we grow the plants. Because when you start getting up higher, the plants start dying quicker. When we try to grow them here, or in Louisiana, and y'all aren't too far, you get a little bit warmer thing on you in the wintertime, but I get just as warmer than you do in the summer. So you're supposed to have temperatures like I had last week, I think over the next few days, so I look forward to you all being hot like I've been. But I don't complain about the heat. I love it. I just go inside more often, and I change my t-shirts pretty often. And I don't get to hug my darling bride as much because she says, "You are so sweaty." And she does needlepoint and computer stuff. So she doesn't come out that often in the backyard, but she always knows she can find me back there. So all she has to do is open the back door and holler. They also have a narrow central tank for the most part, but they do have large petals, and probably the largest in this family Bromelioideae as far as the plants are concerned. There are 20 species recognized now. And this is a list of them. The thing that's a little bit unusual is this is two totally separate groups of plants. There's something that they call the Pernambuca complex, which includes Gigas and Rothisiana and Silvermontana, and some of those plants that you may grow. We used to have it. They grow fairly large. We used to call them Carcharodon, rubra, broadleaf, and stuff like that. But they've categorized them now, split them into different genera, species, and list them, and they don't know where to put them. So they say, well, just leave them where they are for now. Maybe somebody that's young will want to write a doctor's dissertation on them and go climbing around the mountains in Brazil and find a bunch of them. So that's what we're waiting for. But some of the members are that we do see Rubro vittata. That's not an unusual plant to see. The Fuego form you see occasionally, and it has a little bit more of an upright form to it. The same thing with Caryi. There's a green form and a red form. But look at the length of those petals. You measure them out, and they're 60 to 110 millimeters. This is something that gets you excited if you're if you're not into that. You just say, "Wow, that's big." Another one is the Bahiana. which we used to know as Papspiana, and now there's about 4 different ones that we call the same thing. So that's just going, the splitters and the lumpers can't get together on those. Another one, Azavoydia, you see this sometimes. Another one of the smaller ones with the large flowers. The next subgenus is subgenus Neoregelia. And whenever you have more than one subfamily, subgenus, subspecies, the first one is always the same as the original genus. So Neo has subgenus Neo. And that's where most of them belong. That's where most of the Neos come from. Most of them come from southeast Brazil. They're all below 800 meters. Okay, that was our cutoff for the other subgenus. So they grow near the beach, all the way into the rainforest, all along the coastal areas. And that's where most of our Neos are. Again, this is the same cat. They have all the characteristics of the normal Neoregelia that we know, love, and grow. But what I want to talk about especially is the subgenus Heliacum. Now, you can say Heliacum, you can say Hylaicum, and then Dean Fairchild, if you know Dean, he has his own pronunciation, which comes Hylaicum or Hylaicum, but it doesn't really matter to me. I'm going to call it Heliacum, usually. Sometimes I may call it something else, but that, you'll know what I'm talking about even if you don't care. Where do these rascals come from? Well, they come from the Amazon area. And I used to think of Amazon and Brazil pretty much as the same thing. But when you look at this, the Amazon tributaries primarily come from the western portion. And we're talking about Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, even Bolivia contributes, as well as Brazil. The equator runs right along here. So this is basically in the equatorial area. And that tells you, we think it's hot, but man, it's hot there all the time. And it's very humid there. Most of these plants that we're going to talk about say that they're found along the banks of rivers and the trees that overhang the rivers. But I think that's primarily because it takes a lot of guts to get out of the boat and wander away from the river. So, you know, if you don't get out of the boat, you're going to find things that are near the riverbanks, and that's where most of them are. And it's that upper Amazon basin, and again, hot and steamy. So we've got to expect that these plants are going to prefer a hotter temperature, more and a very humid area all the time. The leaves are really tough. When you bend the leaves or feel them, you know, they're really stiff. And the spines, when you run up against them, they don't give up and fold under like some of the other bromeliads. They just grab hold, you know, and you walk away remembering these periods. They have broad bases, and they form sort of a pseudobulb or a bulbular shape for the most part. They're all stoloniferous. The fruits, after the bloom, are bright blue or a blue-green, rather than white or red like most of the other neos are. When you reach in there and pull the fruit out before it starts rotting and stinking and you throw the whole thing out, you get a different color there. They still have the rosette shape, but it's more of a bell shape. And the flower petals are free. They open up and they're not connected. So they're not connected at the base like some of the other neos are. They're mostly small to medium size. They propagate on long stolons. They're all epiphytic. None of them are really terrestrial. The inflorescence is a dense cluster of white to blue flowers, deeply sunken in the center of the cups. And the leaves are coriaceous. Everybody looks like they know what I think coriaceous is. But that's leathery. Why the botanists can't say the leaves are leathery, we would know what they meant. Why they have to say coriaceous, I don't know. But they are. Here's our 10 species. Bromeliad, Liviana, Margarita, Moriana, Myrmicophilia, Pendula rosea, stoloniferous, Pteropodiotensis, and Werdachii. Those are the 10 species. There are some others that have moved in and out, but they generally grow with long stolons, and you have to be careful the way you grow them. If you grow them on wire going across the top and they slide together, barbed wire is good to use because the barbs stop the baskets from getting into each other. But then you got to be careful when you get on a ladder and get too close to the barbed wire. You remember that experience too. But I've coined the term intertwined conflagration, and I think this is a good picture of it. When you get several pots together and the stolons come down and they all get together with each other, it's a real challenge. And after half hour, 45 minutes, and blood dripping, you decide, I'm going to cut these pups off instead of leaving them all together. So you can remember intertwined conflagration. I didn't mention, and I definitely should have, a lot of these slides that I'm using, especially the prepared ones, which you all recognize, are from the FCBS website, and they certainly deserve the credit for the way they've taken care of their donated photographs and give us all something to look at. One of the plants that has been in the Heliacum before is Egmea aculocephala, but it's moved out now. Somebody decided that it ought to be an Egmea because nobody knows what puts the Egmeas together, so they decided to make it an Egmea. So now it's an Egmea instead of a Heliacum, and we'll kind of come back to that. So if you have a plant that you've had since the 60s and 70s and it says Aculeacephala, it's now an Egmea. This is David Sheedy from Hawaii's daughter holding an Eleuthera pedala crossed with a pendula. It just gives you an idea of the look of the larger ones in the species. The wide leaf bases coming to a point, more of this upright bulbous type shape. And that's just for the plants to come. Now as we go to the individual ones, the first one I'm going to talk about is Neurigelia electropedala. Electropedala can grow 1.5 to 2 foot wide. It's one of the larger growers of the Heliacum. And they're normally an apple green to a rosy red in color, depending on the growing conditions and the particular clone that you're growing. They're very attractive plants, especially when they come into bloom and you can see how intense the color is. Normally you'll see them like this rather than the real intense colors with the green and then red as it comes into bloom. They're really found from Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, Venezuela, again, in the trees, along the riverbanks. There are some dark forms also. They have somewhat shorter stolons than some of the others we'll talk about in a few minutes. But their leaves are a couple of inches wide or wider, brown spines, but they don't take cold well. I love the dark tone forms with this. Sometimes it's called a Elephoropedala red form, or Elephoropedala rosea, or Elephoropedala rubra. You see a lot of those different names for them, but they're really very attractive plants. A collector from Miami, Lee Moore, who's been collecting, I don't know how many years. He was selling plants back in the 50s and early 60s and getting shot at and taking monkeys out of the jungle and all kinds of stuff way back years ago. But he found this particular form, and they named it Eleptropetala bicolor. And it's a different variety of the species. And the leaf bases are more pink than green or red. So it's a different color, but really, really a nice form of the Eleptropetala. Moving on to the next plant of the Philiacum. This is Neoregelia myrmecophylla. Now this is again a fairly large plant, not as full leaves as the Eleptropetala. And the name, if you're really into botany, tells you something, and that means related to ants. So it's found near the mangroves, on the mangrove trees, right along the sandy beaches, and along the sides of the rivers. And very often the ants will nest along the stolons, and you'll get the big nest there. They also do the similar type thing with the Eleptropetala, but especially with these. So the botanist that named them, I'm sure, took his plant down and got covered with ants and said, I know what I'm going to name this sucker. But the ants live in symbiosis with the plant. They get protection of the plant, and they get a good source of water with the water down in the cups. The plant gets the ants' droppings and whatever they leave behind for nourishment, and the protection from herbivores, because the ants will swarm up on katydids and different things that land on the plant, and they don't get a chance to chew on the bromeliad. So it's a symbiotic relationship. It's one where both the plant and the insect live together and get benefits, and they don't really harm each other. Again, they're found in Ecuador primarily, but all along those areas. They can be the green, orange, and the red forms. And they can get up to 30, 32 inches. So they're fairly good size. They really don't take cold well. And so that's something to keep in mind. When I say cold, I would say from my experience, if you want to keep them growing and happy, you're going to have to keep them over 55 degrees. If you want to keep them alive, then you can go down to 42 degrees, something like that. And if you go too much lower than that, down into the 30s, you're going to get some leaf damage. You probably won't lose the plant, but nobody wants a really always ratty looking plant. So, although some of us have attachment to some of those. Only their mother and I can love some of these things. The next one is Neoregelia margarita. And I've got one of Margaret Mead's pictures because it looks so much better than my plant. I got my plant, it's still on the bench. I started trimming the leaves, and I got a lot more trims than I got leaves left. The blooms, though, are real intriguing. She's got all the blue in the center, and mine looks just like that, with all the blue in the center. It's the leaves that mine has a problem with. But a nice plant you don't really see very often. And that pretty much takes care of the large forms. As we start going to the medium forms, you run into Neoregelia stolonifera. It has a more flattened, widened out form. The leaves are a little bit thinner. And